The Jewel in the Crown continues on ITV next Tuesday at 9, and there's a second chance to see each episode on Channel 4 on Sundays at 8:15. A fully illustrated book, The Making of the Jewel in the Crown, is now available in bookshops, price £5.95. And a colour guide to the series, including Who's Who and a map, is available by post. Send a cheque or postal order for 75p to Granada Television, Post Office Box 50, Market Harborough, Leicestershire, LE16 9PP.
There are thousands of people all over Britain who, while driving on wet roads, have encountered a great danger. Maybe they didn't see the water lying in a hollow. Perhaps they misjudged a deceptive bend. When the moment of maximum danger came, they were lucky enough to be traveling on a road surface called shell grip. Tires grip better on shell grip. It is estimated that shell grip has already saved thousands of people from injury or death. You can be sure of Shell.
You know, there is a computer that won't let you down. New Momentum 9000 from CTL. The new Super Mini that's designed to bounce straight back into action. It proves you can't keep a good computer down. Hey, yup. New Momentum 9000 from CTL. There's no stopping us.
Since Sainsbury's first opened in 1869, pets have never been allowed inside. But now we've introduced Sainsbury's Supreme Pet Food, they've been trying all kinds of animal cunning to get in. Supreme is a supreme range of cat and dog food at a Sainsbury's price. Of course, pets still aren't allowed inside Sainsbury's stores, but you are. So remember, good pet food costs less at Sainsbury's. Harrods sale is the sale that never runs out of steam. The store is still overflowing with sale merchandise, and there are more half-price bargains than most sales start with. That's why it's the greatest, most famous sale in the world. Harrods sale, you know the difference shows.
Tom's cold symptoms don't keep him off the farm anymore. All he needs is new Vicks Cold Care. Takes on your cold while you take on your day. Simple.
I see she's back from shopping then.
Oh, yes.
Well, look.
Now, Bovril cubes have an even richer, meatier taste than ever before. They add so much more to the real, meaty flavour of your cooking. You might expect them to be bigger. Now, Bovril cubes taste meatier than ever. They must be bigger, aren't they?
Harp Heating. Prices held. Save £100 plus no deposit finance with nothing to pay till July. Ring 464-6575 now.
When Gran bought herself a motorbike, well, I knew Dad would need a nice cup of Quick Brew. Quick Brew makes a lovely cup of tea because these flavour perforations let all the rich taste of the tea flow through.
That's better.
Well, I'm ready for the tea. With milk and sugar. Quick Brew makes a lovely cup of tea.
See what's on ITV and Channel 4 for the week ahead in TV Times. Jewel in the Crown, the American Super Bowl. Wish you were here.
At 10:30, the final part of our special programme, The Decade of Destruction, which travels around the Amazon jungle as it is cut down and talks about the future.
tonight may be your first glimpse of a future world champion as we bring you the senior boxing finals of the National Association of Boys Clubs. The venue is a glamorous one, the Grosvenor House Hotel, and in the audience a whole host of former boxers who all came through the ranks of boys clubs. Names like Henry Cooper, Maurice Hope, Alan Minter, they're all here along with a host of other showbiz and sporting personalities. And you can join them for the Boys Club finals tonight at 11:30.
This is Thames from London. Now it's ITN at 10.
The Commons vote on rates. They're counting the Tory revolt. Heath says Thatcher has damaged the economy. The father of the assaulted girl has his say. Linda McCartney faces a cannabis drugs charge. And Liverpool just escaped to fight again. Good evening. The Prime Minister faces a revolt by some 24 Conservative MPs tonight as the House of Commons votes now on the rate capping bill, which will restrict local councils' freedom to spend. Mrs. Thatcher said today the overwhelming majority want legislation to restrain the increase in rates. The former Prime Minister, Mr. Heath, was among the Tories who said the powers the government wanted had never been taken even in wartime, and he will vote against. Labour's Dr. John Cunningham said it should be called the Abolition of Local Democracy Bill. The question being decided now is how many Conservatives will join Labour and the alliance parties in the opposition lobby. The Environment Secretary, Mr. Patrick Jenkin, said that without the bill, those who pay domestic rates were powerless to stop what he called profligate councils.
It is the duty of this House to act. We have a duty to protect ratepayers from blatant exploitation. We have a duty to ensure that all parts of the public sector work within national economic policies. Other efforts have to make these few authorities see reason have failed.
No one in this House interested in democratic freedoms, local choice or local decision-taking, no one interested in the decentralization of power, no one who opposes bureaucratic central control, Whitehall domination, could espouse the cause embodied in this, the most sinister measure to control freedom proposed by any British government this century.
I came into this House in 1950, having fought an election on Mr. Churchill's theme that we were to set the people free. It wasn't a theme that we are to set the people free to do what we tell them. The theme was to set the people free. And with it went a companion theme, local government should be local.
I feel a sense of despair that it is a Conservative government that brings before this House a measure so basically bad, so potentially dangerous, and in the final analysis, so pathetically inept.
Two particularly outspoken attacks on the government there from two very eminent Tories. And although there were several loyalist Conservatives who defended the government, it was inevitably the rebels who dominated the stage. Government ministers looked increasingly uncomfortable as Mr. Heath outlined his attack on the bill. Although he has frequently criticised Mrs. Thatcher's government, he's never before voted against it. And it's a doubly unusual step in that he's not only a former Prime Minister, but also a former Chief Whip. Soon after Mr. Ripon, another former Minister, Reg Prentice, declared himself for the revolt, and opponents who haven't actually spoken include former Cabinet Ministers Francis Pym, David Howell and Sir Ian Gilmore. The rebels are relying on the quality rather than the quantity of their troops. The Tory whips have been hard at work trying to contain the rebellion today, and the government's likely to end up with a very comfortable majority. But ministers have had a rough ride, notably the Environment Secretary Patrick Jenkin, who was repeatedly interrupted during his speech, and his deputy William Waldegrave, who found it hard to make himself heard winding up just now. But the debate hasn't been fatal for the bill. The rebels' hope now is to try and get it amended in committee, and failing that, the vote in the House of Lords in the spring is likely to be a very close-run thing. David Walter, News at 10, Westminster.
Between speaking against the government in the Commons and voting against it, Mr. Heath went to the city to criticise it for its overall economic policies. He said the depth of the recession in Britain was due in part to policies deliberately pursued by the government. And he said growth this year was unlikely to be much above 2%, which would barely maintain employment at its present level.
Mr. Heath arrived at the Guildhall straight from the House of Commons to deliver the day's second attack on Mrs. Thatcher's government, this time a comprehensive indictment of her economic achievements. Monetarism had been based on a naive and simplistic analysis. Inflation, he said, had been reduced mainly by boosting unemployment.
Britain has suffered a recession deeper than any of her OECD partners. This has been due in part to policies deliberately pursued by the government. It is my firm belief that the squeeze in this country has been far too tight and has damaged the fabric of our economy.
Mr. Heath referred to the Chancellor's warning about possible tax increases in his next budget. That, he said, would be an act of folly, and he condemned what he called an attempt to engineer a panic about public spending. Calling for reflation of the economy, he said Britain needed more investment with a renewed programme of public works.
Having reduced inflation, we do now have an opportunity to expand. I do not believe that a moderate expansion of the economy will be inflationary. I would urge the Chancellor to do this in his coming budget. I would strongly support moderate reflation by increasing public expenditure on capital investment.
Mr. Heath was politely applauded by his audience of city dealers, though it was made clear many did not agree with him. Then he left to vote against his party. Glenn Mathias, News at 10 at the Guildhall.
The Conservative-controlled Birmingham City Council announced a cut in rates today for the second year running. They're to be 105.5 pence in the pound from April. That's down 5 pence. The Tory council leader, Mr. Neville Bosworth, said it was possible because of good housekeeping. He promised that services would not be cut.
The Soviet news agency TASS said tonight that Russian soldiers are manning new nuclear missile bases inside East Germany. And the United States arms negotiator Paul Nietzsche said in Washington that President Reagan was considering what could be offered to make it easier for the Soviet Union to return to nuclear arms talks. This was the first day of the Stockholm Disarmament Conference, now the only place where Russia and America are discussing arms reductions.
Tonight, delegates to the Stockholm Conference were invited to the ballet. Torch-carrying peace demonstrators backed by a children's choir marked their arrival. As the snow began to fall more heavily, the visiting foreign ministers hurried into the theatre without a backward glance, though they are certainly aware of the protest message that the world is waiting for results.
This conference will be closely followed by our peoples. It is evident that the danger of war has come to engage and preoccupy their minds in a manner which may be without precedent. We are all aware that the aim and goal of this meeting is of decisive importance for the future of Europe.
American Secretary Shultz made new proposals for building East-West confidence, talked of the difficult recent negotiations, and criticized Russia for abandoning the Geneva missile talks.
The door remains open. We are ready for negotiation whenever the Soviet Union is prepared. In this regard, I am pleased to announce that in coming months at the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva, the United States negotiators will be presenting a draft treaty for the complete and verifiable elimination of chemical weapons on a global basis. We will work in a similar spirit for early progress in other arms control forums once resumed.
Russia has also called for a chemical weapon ban, but limited to Europe. Later, at a press conference, Mr. Shultz was buoyant about the day's events.
I find that the atmosphere is universally one of seriousness of purpose and intent, and a general desire to see this conference result in something constructive.
Tomorrow, Russia's Mr. Gromyko will speak and later have private talks with Mr. Shultz, but there's little optimism that their meeting will achieve much. Jeffrey Archer, News at 10, Stockholm.
Here, the government have asked for an urgent report from Liverpool Social Services on the case of a 7-year-old handicapped girl who was fostered out to a man already under investigation for a sex offence. The girl, who's mentally and physically disabled, lives at home, but was placed with the foster family for the weekend to give her parents a break. The foster father was jailed yesterday for indecently assaulting her. The Liberal MP, Mr. David Alton, said he had called for a government report on the case 3 months ago.
Police had asked that father of 3, David Brewer, not be approached while they investigated sex offence cases against him. Liverpool Social Services agreed, but at the same time sent the 7-year-old girl to the Brewers' home because they'd been reliable foster parents. Social Services Director Donald Cheetham admits his department made a big mistake, but denies any collaboration with the police to catch the man. The police won't comment.
No, I didn't go along with the police plan. There was no plan at all. The police didn't ask us to do anything other than not to interview the man before they had interviewed him themselves.
But clearly you ought to have interviewed him, is that the case?
Well, with hindsight, you can say that, but certainly we were not acting in any way in concert with the police. There's absolutely no perfection in this world. We will make misjudgments. Yes, we will make misjudgments in the future, I believe. We take every possible step to ensure that whatever judgments we make are based on the most on sufficient knowledge of the situation.
Whether the Director of Social Services says the child was used as bait or not, the fact remains that if his letter to my constituents, the Director's letter, is true, then he said that he was acting in concert with the police. The effect was that the child was used as bait, and the child suffered abuse as a result of this, and that frankly isn't good enough.
The little girl's father says he's considering taking the council to court. He says the social services were well aware of the danger his child was in. For legal reasons, he can't be identified.
I'm sad. I'm sad that it happened, that they used my daughter. I think it's somebody's made a mistake, a very bad mistake, and they've used my daughter. They've said it's unfortunate, but it doesn't help me.
Linda McCartney, the wife of the former Beatle Paul McCartney, has been charged at Heathrow Airport with possessing cannabis. The couple arrived home from Barbados this morning after both were fined there yesterday for the same offence. Before his wife was questioned, Paul McCartney called for cannabis to be, as he put it, decriminalised.
British Airways met the McCartneys with a car and gave them and their children a sightseeing drive round the airport before they met the press. Their luggage, meanwhile, was being checked by customs before being transferred to their private jet. And it was during this that cannabis was allegedly found. Paul McCartney knew nothing of this as he discussed what happened in Barbados with the press.
I was just caught with a small quantity of cannabis, for which I was fined $200 Barbados dollars. I don't hold any grudges. It didn't really spoil my holiday. I don't believe it's a terribly harmful thing to do, but I don't actually, if left to my own devices, I will prefer not say anything about it.
Did you think they'd send you to drugs?
Are you?
I don't take drugs. I never have taken drugs. Are you going to?
No.
Were you worried about being
Never again. Never
Were you
again.
worried about being sent to jail?
Yes, I know.
So why did you do it?
Do you mean it this time? Pardon?
Do you mean it this time?
Probably not. do you think the Barbados people were more relaxed
let's get
about
one
it
thing
than they would have
straight.
been
Can we
in
get
London?
one
thing straight? That whatever you think and whatever you think I've done, this, I'm telling you, this substance, cannabis, is a whole lot less harmful than rum punch, whiskey, nicotine, and glue, all of which are perfectly legal.
What about your children? What about your children,
I would like
Paul?
to see it decriminalised, because I don't think, in the privacy of my own room, I was doing anyone any harm whatsoever.
Mrs. McCartney will appear in court next week.
The comet that visits Earth in interesting times, like 1066, is coming again. There are plans to intercept. The report next. Plus, safe and sound, the ship they left to sink. And Liverpool just hold Wednesday, replay probably next Tuesday. That's in a couple of minutes.
Now stories are told of a brave man of old, whose interest was Whitbread best beer. But he knew a klutz who drove him nearly nuts, that was Abdullah Bulbul Amir. Now that snake in the grass was a pain in the neck, claiming Whitbread tastes best from the jar. And this man most irate, with his own glass quite straight, was Count Ivan Skavinsky Skavar. Well, those boastful old goats went out canvassing votes, but one thing they both did forget. Be it straight glass or jar, Whitbread's not particular, 'cause the best needs no etiquette.
Who says KLM's the reliable airline?
Well, KLM.
Well, they would, wouldn't they?
So do 44 other airlines who rely on KLM to train their crews.
But KLM fly through Amsterdam, don't they?
Yes, Schiphol Airport. Just been voted Airport of the Year, yet again.
Did you say something? No. Funny. I thought I heard voices.
KLM is the reliable airline.
Everyone says so.
The mighty dollar. Is it about to give Europe an almighty headache? Is Fiat's New Deal in the Midlands a sign of things to come? And is a new class of robots about to graduate from Oxford University? In a week, when the FT answered all these questions, what was your point of view? No FT, no comment.
"53 journalists from 16 countries compared the Fiat Uno against the best new cars of 1983. They looked at comfort, styling, technical development, and value for money. The result, the Uno beat all of its competitors. That's why Europe's journalists named it Car of the Year 1984. So now you know why we call it #1.
Europe's first ever deep space probe is well on schedule for launching in July. The satellite is being built by British Aerospace. It'll travel hundreds of millions of miles for more than 8 months before it intercepts its target, Halley's Comet.
The Giotto satellite is rapidly taking shape on the floor of the Space Assembly Hall at British Aerospace's Filton Works near Bristol. They've built and successfully tested a full-scale mock-up of the spacecraft, including the camera that will take the first ever close-up photographs of a comet. Now they're building the real thing, a £30 million probe that will carry 10 experiments to take the closest ever look at a comet. It's called Giotto after the Florentine artist who painted Halley's Comet as the Star of Bethlehem in his adoration of the Magi. Not surprising, since Giotto saw the comet only 2 years before he started his fresco. More than 200 years earlier, in 1066, King Harold's subjects were awed by the comet. They saw it as a harbinger of doom. It wasn't very lucky for Harold. Halley's Comet returns every 76 years, and people's fascination with it was unabated on its last visit in 1910. Scientists now think the core of a comet is like a dirty snowball, ice mixed with impurities that boil off as the comet nears the sun. But they admit they know very little about comets in general. Giotto will give them the answers they need to settle the controversies. It will be launched from the European Space Agency's site in French Guiana next July. It has to be launched in a 15-day window, otherwise it will miss the comet, which by then will be passing the sun. Giotto will travel through space for 8 months before the encounter with the comet. It has to be guided with pinpoint accuracy to pass within 300 miles of the comet's core in order to take its close-up photographs. It will pass through the comet for 4 hours, but has only 14 seconds to photograph the core. Dust particles travelling 50 times faster than a bullet will batter the probe. There's a risk that the dust particles will knock Giotto's radio aerial so it doesn't point back to Earth. If that happens, the photographs will be lost forever. Japan and Russia are also sending Comet probes. The 2 Russian probes will arrive before Giotto, and to help out, they will send radio signals to the European spacecraft to guide it on its way. If Giotto misses this time, the scientists will have to wait until the year 2061 for another try. Lawrence McGuinty, News at 10, Bristol.
An official government inquiry has started in Zimbabwe into atrocities allegedly carried out by the Army's 5th Brigade. They're alleged to have massacred up to 2,000 civilians in Matabeleland, the stronghold of Mr. Joshua Nkomo and his Zipra forces. Many people from that area, some of them orphan children, have fled over the border to a refugee camp in neighbouring Botswana.
We found the orphans of Dukwe camp gathered under a giant baobab tree in their makeshift school playground. The parents of many of these children are dead, killed by the 5th Brigade during its year-long occupation of Matabeleland. The children trekked up to 100 miles through the bush to reach the comparative safety of Dukwe camp just across the Botswana border. Dukwe, with its budget of $2 million a year, is the most expensive refugee camp in the world per head of population. Normally, refugees are only provided with foreign aid for the first 6 months. Here, they're fed indefinitely. The drought has wiped out their crops, and the refugees are coming in virtually every day. While we were there, more arrived. Their reasons for leaving were all the same.
When they find a woman or otherwise pregnant, they just kill him. The way of killing him, they were cutting him here, this side, until the young one comes out.
But they started hitting my father, and they ordered me to kill him. They gave me their bayonet. They ordered me to cut him, but I refused.
The camp has now become a logical recruiting ground for anti-government dissidents. 30 men abscond every month. The Botswana authorities freely admit that over 600 former Zipra fighters live at Dukwe, but insist it's a genuine refugee camp. But Zimbabwe's Prime Minister is convinced Dukwe is being used as a base for dissident incursions into his country.
From Dukwe, they have now developed a link with South Africa, where several of them have gone for training, so they can be infiltrated back with more arms.
Fearing an attack from Zimbabwe, the Botswana Defence Force has now moved into Dukwe. Their presence here provides a morale boost for the refugees, who, according to the camp's administrator, are terrified of a cross-border strike by the 5th Brigade. Peter Sharp, News at 10 in northern Botswana.
A Defence Ministry Jaguar warplane has crashed close to the government's secret germ research establishment, Porton Down, in Wiltshire. The pilot ejected and landed safely inside the base on the roof of a building. An eyewitness said he saw the jet explode right over the base and said the pilot was only about 150 feet up when he bailed out. A total of 6 Jaguars crashed last year. All the pilots survived.
More than 4,000 workers at the Scott Lithgow shipyard on the Lower Clyde have been warned that unless a private buyer is found by late summer, the yard will close. British Shipbuilders Chairman Mr. Graham Day told the unions today that more than 3,000 jobs would have to go by March. The future of the yard has been in doubt since Britoil cancelled an £88 million contract for an oil rig last month. The order was withdrawn with work said to be 2 years behind schedule. The unions then offered to accept new working practices to try to save the yard. Their leaders meet in London tomorrow. The future of another yard could be saved under a rescue plan agreed by the unions tonight. The Tyne Ship Repair Yard, with a workforce of nearly 1,000, is to be bought by 2 of its directors. The yard is due for closure next month, but the new owners say they'll guarantee 850 jobs for at least a year.
The weathermen say there's more snow to come and it may spread to southern England by Thursday. But in the northeast today, hurricane-force winds caused the worst problems. On Tyneside, 30 families had to be evacuated from their council flats in Newcastle when gusts of up to 90 miles an hour started to lift off the roofs. But a helicopter was able to relieve 2 stranded lighthouse keepers off the Isle of Wight. Both were lifted off after a record stint of 33 days on the Needles. In Scotland, snowplows turned out in force to clear major roads and airport runways. More snow and more gales had been forecast, but neither materialised, and all main routes were reopened. The Dutch freighter, which sailed 200 miles through the North Sea gales with no one on board, has been towed into Heath from where she ran aground at Dunbar. The ship's crew left the ship on autopilot when they abandoned her on Friday the 13th. But the Scottish fishermen who found her are looking to their luck.
The Dutch freighter Pergo should by rights be at the bottom of the North Sea. Last Friday she was 240 miles off the coast of Scotland, lashed by 100-mile-an-hour winds and towering seas. Her captain, convinced she was sinking, sent an SOS to the Norwegian Air Sea Rescue Service, and when helicopters arrived, abandoned ship with his crew. The Pergo, her lifeboat shattered, seemed doomed. But below decks, the ship's engines, left on to hold her stable during the rescue operation, kept her running at half speed, an empty ghost ship ploughing on with no one at the helm. 2 days later, after making her way unobserved through several oil fields, the Pergo finally struck land near Dunbar, east of Edinburgh. Her deserted bridge spotless, her cargo of fertilizer apparently intact. Lifeboatmen were staggered to find her empty, her lights ablaze. Her crew couldn't believe it when they were told she'd survived. But no one was happier than the crewmen of 3 local fishing boats who towed the Pergo into Heath harbour. They happily nailed an arrest notice to her radio mast to stake their claim to salvage rights and a handsome jackpot.
This year's budget is expected on Tuesday, March the 13th. The date should be announced on Thursday. Sir Terence Beckett, the Director General of the Employers, the CBI, said the Chancellor should give priority to industry by abolishing the national insurance surcharge and cutting rates, and not cutting income tax. Another High Court contempt of court battle with a print union, SOGAT 82, seems to be looming. It follows a decision by the BBC today to cancel its order with Mr. Robert Maxwell's firm to print the London edition of the Radio Times. Distribution has been disrupted by SOGAT despite a High Court order. And now the BBC and Mr. Maxwell are to report to the court, the union, for contempt.
Anti-terrorist detectives in Belfast are questioning 2 men arrested in England. A 3rd man from Belfast is also being held. One of the men is 38-year-old lorry driver Robert Gray. He was arrested at home in Malvern.
Several people are now being held here at the Castlereagh Centre near Belfast in connection with serious terrorist offences in the early 70s. 4 arrests made last night have been confirmed following information from a loyalist supergrass. 2 of those being held are members of the UDA who were on bail pending terrorist charges before being rearrested in the last 24 hours. Another man was arrested in London and is thought to be a senior member of the loyalist paramilitary forces. The only person named is 38-year-old unemployed lorry driver Robert Gray from the West Midlands. Mr. Gray is a former member of the UDA and has lived in England for the last 10 years.
Soccer. In the Milk Cup quarter-finals, Division 2 Sheffield Wednesday have held First Division Liverpool to a 2-all draw. 50,000 watched the match, Wednesday's biggest gate for 20 years.
Wednesday were unlucky not to score when Shelton shot and Grobbelaar made an instinctive save. Having survived that near escape, Liverpool counter-attacked in typical fashion. Souness was quick to snap onto a defensive mistake, and Nicol was even sharper to spot the goalkeeper off his line. And even the home crowd, Sheffield Wednesday's biggest for many years, must have appreciated that touch of class. Wednesday, however, were in no mood to be overawed by the cup holders, for they too began to show the class that should take them back to the First Division next season. Varadi beat Kennedy with ease and had the rest of the defence at 6s and 7s before putting in a perfect cross to the head of Megson. On a bitingly cold night, the home crowd was further warmed by a stroke of luck when Liverpool's Lawrenson inadvertently diverted Bannister's shot into his own net. But Liverpool had the final say in a stirring match, Johnston putting Rush into the clear, only for Hodge to bring him down. Neal took the all-important kick. It allows Liverpool to retain their hold on the cup, but Sheffield have another bite at the cherry in next Tuesday's replay at Anfield. Ian Edwards, ITN Sport.
In the other Milk Cup game, Villa got revenge for last week's FA Cup defeat by Norwich, beating them 2-0. In the Canon League, Division 1, Queen's Park Rangers defeated Stoke 6-0. Charles got 2 goals.
And now the Commons vote on the rate capping bill. There was a Tory revolt, but the government had for them a safe but smallish majority of just 99 votes. It seems at least a dozen Conservative MPs, including Mr. Heath, voted against the bill, and probably 20 abstained. David Rose has been speaking to the Environment Secretary, Mr. Patrick Jenkin, about the vote and what it means.
Mr. Jenkin, Mr. Heath called the powers of this bill draconian and said they exceeded anything governments had taken before, even in 2 world wars, and he voted against you. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think the answer was given to him by one of our supporters on the back benches who reminded the House gently that it was Mr. Heath that introduced, and I was a member of the government, and I take my share of that responsibility, the government that introduced the prices and incomes legislation, which did represent a massive centralisation of power over the setting of prices and setting of incomes right across the whole economy. So I think that must be taken with a pinch of salt. And I think it is also fair to say that Mr. Heath's speech did, I think, consolidate a number of our waverers into our own budget, because they felt, they found it rather offensive.
But there is a substantial body of conservative opinion against you. Wouldn't you accept that?
The answer was, the result was exactly what we expected in terms of the vote. There have always been a few, perhaps about 15, who were determined to vote against this bill, and another 15 who may have abstained, and the figures, majority of 99, actually does arithmetically produce precisely that. But we'll need to look at the division list tomorrow.
Will you make any changes to the bill in view of this opposition?
It's always the duty of ministers taking legislation, any legislation, through committee, to listen carefully to the arguments that are put and the amendments that are moved. And these will obviously then have to be looked at on their merits and considered as to whether or not they will actually improve the bill.
Mr. Jenkin, he now faces the committee stage and then the House of Lords. That's the news tonight. Good night.
Coming up next, the Thames News Headlines. That's followed by the final part of The Decade of Destruction.
Look over here. Just behind you, you could be missing the biggest business opportunity in Europe. 8 square miles. Ah.
Yes, it's London Docklands, and terrific tax incentives make the Isle of Dogs an island paradise.
You'll save money on phone bills too, because it's handy for all your clients in London.
And as it happens, it's just a short distance as the crowd jogs from all those businessmen and business ladies.
The London Docklands Development Corporation. Why move to the middle of nowhere when you can move to the middle of London?
Harrods sale is the sale that never runs out of steam. The store is still overflowing with sale merchandise, and there are more half-price bargains than most sales start with. That's why it's the greatest, most famous sale in the world. Harrods sale, you know the difference shows.
What's a holiday in Canada like?
I suppose it'd be quite relaxing, really.
It's all too mechanised for me.
I suppose you could rely on the steaks. They'd be all right.
How would you get anywhere?
Is it all skyscrapers?
It's all cowboys.
Canada? Well, I think I'd probably get rather bored at night. Where would you go?
Well, it's all right if you like barn dancing, I'd imagine.
Country and western. No, it's a bit too noisy and hectic for me.
Quite frankly, I've no idea.
There's more to Canada than you think. Canada. It's a bigger holiday.
When you're a top athlete like Sebastian Coe, you don't get many moments to yourself. You're forever bustling from one place to the next. And you've still got to find time for training. So there are times during the day when you just need to relax with instant Horlicks, full of the goodness of wheat and malted barley. Instant Horlicks. Instant relaxation from Horlicks.
And Co.
Good evening. The Thames News Headlines. The 2 biggest rail unions today announced a joint campaign to fight cuts to services on southern region. BR say there'll be only a 2% reduction, but ASLEF and the NUR say the cuts are much bigger. They've warned there could be strikes before Easter. Around 4,000 pensioners took a bus to Parliament to preserve their free travel on public transport. They're worried their passes will disappear when the GLC is abolished. Mrs Thatcher told MPs the government are ready to discuss the financial effects of the transfer of bus passes or any GLC service with the boroughs. Meanwhile, the GLC have warned that the London Marathon could go if they do. They said next year's race could be the last because their administrative help will be missed. Ford workers at Dagenham will meet tomorrow to discuss calls for a one-day strike on Thursday over the company's plans to close the Thames foundry. The unions are threatening to black imports of engine parts, which could be made at the foundry, due to shut next April with a loss of 2,000 jobs. Tonight, MPs in Essex, including Brian Gould, the member for Dagenham, pledged their support.
Essentially what we're trying to do is to show that the local politicians, whose constituents are very much affected by this, are concerned to give what help they can to the unions, and indeed to raise the matter with the Ford management. That's what I'm keen to do, to ask them what their long-term plans are for the future of the Dagenham plant.
The BBC today cancelled their order with Robert Maxwell's Park Royal Works to print the Radio Times. There have been no London editions for several weeks because of a dispute involving the British Printing and Communications Corporation and the print union Sogat 82. The union are defying a High Court order to lift restrictions. A schoolgirl from Harrow Weald, whose weight ballooned to 15 stone after she broke a leg in a PE class, was awarded nearly £10,000 damages against Harrow Council. Wendy Tillotson, who was 11 at the time, made up for the boredom and unhappiness of being in a hospital bed by eating. Finally, Paul McCartney, back in town today after being fined for a drug offence in Barbados, has struck a sour note with some horse riders in Surrey. The video of his hit record Pipes of Peace was filmed on Chobham Common. Local riders say that while they've been banned in case they cause damage, McCartney's film company dug trenches to recreate a First World War setting. Finally, Thames weather. Tonight, dry and clear and a low of -2 centigrade, that's 28 Fahrenheit. Tomorrow, dry and bright with a high of 4 centigrade, 39 Fahrenheit. That's it. Now, the final part of Decade of Destruction in the Ashes of the Forest.
As the forests of the Amazon are cleared and burnt, what's hard to accept is when the destruction is obviously for nothing. When colonists, like Renato in our previous film, abandon their useless land. But when we invited Brazil's best-known environmentalist to explain, he insisted we begin, far from this jungle of Rondonia, on the vast mechanized monocultures of the south of Brazil.